The rain fell like shattered glass over the whispering woods, each drop stinging the earth, as if the sky itself wept for the forgotten. Mist clung to the gnarled roots of ancient oaks, twisting through the underbrush like spectral fingers, and the air hummed with the distant howl of something wild and unbroken. In the heart of this forsaken tangle, where the packlands bled into the wilds, Ilara knelt by a crumbling stream, her fingers numb from the cold as she sifted through the mud for roots or berries, anything to quiet the gnawing ache in her belly. She was no stranger to hunger. As the rejected Omega of the Silverfang pack, Ilara had long since learned to fade into the shadows, her once vibrant spirit dulled by years of scorn. The pack's alpha, a brute named Thorn, with eyes like polished obsidian, had cast her out after the last full moon, declaring her tainted for a vision she dared to voice, a prophecy of fire and rebirth that threatened his iron rule. Now she wandered the fringes, scavenging what the forest spared, her body marked by the faint scars of bites that never fully healed. Omega blood ran thin in her veins, they said, unfit for the pack's savage legacy, but in the quiet hours, when the wind whispered through the leaves, Ilara felt the pull of something deeper, a wild pulse that echoed the moon's hidden rhythms. Tonight, the storm had driven even the rabbits into hiding. Ilara's pack, a meager satchel slung over her shoulder, held only a heel of stale bread, salvaged from a forgotten hunter's camp 2 days past. It was her last, the final crumb of dignity she clutched against the encroaching despair. She rose, wiping mud from her threadbare cloak, her dark hair plastered to her pale face like raven feathers soaked in sorrow. The woods seemed to close in, branches creaking like old bones, and a low growl rumbled from the gloom ahead. At first, she thought it was the wind, or perhaps one of Thorn's enforcers come to finish what exile had started. But as the mist parted, a shape emerged. A wolf, larger than any she'd seen in the packlands, its fur matted with rain and streaked with crimson from some unseen wound. Its eyes glowed amber in the dim light, piercing through the downpour with an intelligence that sent a shiver down her spine. Not fear, but recognition, as if the beast carried the weight of ancient sorrows in its gaze. Ilara froze, her breath catching. The wolf limped forward, ribs stark against its sides, a gash along its flank oozing dark blood that mingled with the rain. It wasn't rabid or feral, no. This was no ordinary predator. Legend spoke of lone wolves in the whispering woods, guardians of the old magic, bound to the moon's phases and the fates of alphas long fallen. But to see one now, so broken and near death, stirred something fierce in her chest, a defiance against the pack's cold indifference. She should have run. Survival demanded it. Yet Ilara's hand trembled as she reached into her satchel, pulling out the bread. It was all she had, the barrier between life and the void. Kneeling slowly, she extended it, palm up, her voice a whisper lost in the storm. "Take it," she murmured, as if speaking to a lost kin. "If the woods claim you, let it not be from emptiness." The wolf hesitated, its breath ragged, nostrils flaring at the scent. For a moment, time stretched thin, the rain a veil between them. Then, with a low whine that pierced her heart, it limped closer, jaws parting to take the offering. Its tongue rasped against her skin, warm and rough, and Ilara felt a spark, a fleeting warmth that chased the chill from her bones. As the beast devoured the bread in desperate gulps, she tore a strip from her cloak, pressing it gently against the wound. The wolf didn't flinch. Instead, it leaned into her touch, eyes half closing in weary trust. "Why you?" Ilara whispered, more to herself than the creature. In the pack, kindness was a weakness, a chain that bound the low to servitude. But here, in the wild's embrace, it felt like rebellion. The wolf's gaze held hers, amber depths swirling with unspoken stories of battles lost, loyalties betrayed, a crown of thorns woven from blood and moonlight. She bandaged the gash as best she could, her fingers stained with its lifeblood, and for the first time in moons, she didn't feel utterly alone. As the storm began to ebb, the wolf rose unsteadily, nuzzling her hand once before vanishing into the mist. Ilara watched it go, her empty satchel, a hollow weight at her side. Hunger clawed anew, sharper now, but a strange peace settled over her. The woods sighed, as if approving her quiet act of grace. She gathered her cloak and pressed on, toward the distant glow of the pack's border fires, unaware that the threads of fate had begun to weave tighter around her fragile form. Night deepened, the moon a sliver of silver peeking through the clouds, casting ethereal light on the forest floor. Ilara found shelter in a hollowed-out stump, curling into its damp embrace, her mind drifting to dreams of packs unbound by cruelty, of omegas who rose like storms. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by the wolf's eyes, until a thunderous crack split the air. Not lightning, but the pound of paws, heavy and purposeful. She jolted awake, heart hammering, as shadows coalesced at the clearing's edge. Figures emerged from the trees, cloaked in midnight fur and armor etched with royal sigils. At their center strode a male whose presence bent the very air, tall, broad-shouldered, with hair like forged obsidian falling to his shoulders. His eyes, the same burning amber, locked onto her with predatory intensity. The Alpha King whispered the wind, the legend made flesh. Draven, ruler of the shadowed realms beyond the Packlands, conqueror of empires and breaker of chains. He moved with the grace of the wolf she'd tended, his wound already half healed, a faint scar blooming across his chest beneath the torn tunic. "You," he rumbled, voice like gravel under thunder, "fed the beast when the world would have let it die." His pack flanked him, silent sentinels. But Draven's gaze held no threat, only a hunger deeper than flesh, a recognition that mirrored her own hidden fire. Ilara scrambled to her feet, pulse racing, the weight of her choice crashing down like the storm's remnants. In that moment, under the watchful moon, she sensed the shift. Her act of mercy had summoned not death, but destiny's unyielding call. The Alpha King's arrival was no coincidence. It was the spark that would ignite the ruins of her world. And as he stepped closer, the mist swirling at his feet, Ilara felt the first stirrings of a power long dormant within her, a wild heart ready to howl. The mist lingered like a shroud as Draven's shadow fell across the hollowed stump, his presence a storm contained in flesh and bone. Ilara's breath hitched, her body coiling tight as a bowstring, every instinct screaming to flee into the underbrush. But those amber eyes held her fast, not with chains, but with a gravity that pulled at the frayed edges of her soul. The pack behind him, warriors with pelts scarred from battles unseen, formed a silent crescent, their breaths sinking with the night's restless pulse. Raindrops traced silver paths down Draven's face, catching the moonlight like tears on a blade. "You have the scent of the wild on you," he said, his voice low and resonant, carrying the rumble of distant thunder. He didn't advance further, respecting the fragile barrier of the stump, but his gaze roamed her form, noting the mud-streaked cloak, the hollows beneath her eyes. "The wolf you saved. It was no stray beast. It was me." Ilara's mind reeled, fragments of old tales crashing against the reality before her. The Alpha King whispered in hushed warnings around pack fires, Draven the Unyielding, who had toppled thrones and bound the shadowed realms under his rule. Legends painted him as a monster, a shifter cursed by the moon goddess to walk the edge between man and wolf, his heart as feral as the winds that howled through the borderlands. Yet here he stood, not as a conqueror, but as something wounded, grateful. Her hand instinctively touched the spot where the wolf's tongue had warmed her skin, and a flush crept up her neck, embarrassment, or the dawning spark of something forbidden. I didn't know," she stammered, her voice barely cutting through the drip of water from overhanging branches. She rose slowly, legs unsteady on the slick earth, refusing to cower even as fear gnawed at her ribs. In the Silverfang pack, Omegas like her bowed and broke. They didn't meet the eyes of Alphas, but exile had stripped her of those chains, leaving only the raw ache of survival. "You were dying. What else could I do? Let the woods take another soul to waste?" Draven's lips curved in a half-smile, shadowed and sharp, revealing the faint points of canines that marked his royal blood. He shrugged off his sodden cloak, letting it pool at his feet like spilled ink, exposing the fresh bandage she'd fashioned, now stained with his essence, a bond woven in haste and mercy. "Many would have. Your pack, for one. Thorn's Silverfangs hunt anything that doesn't kneel." His tone darkened, the name Thorn dripping like venom. "They encroach on my borders, driven by greed for the old magics buried here. But you chose life over fear." The mention of Thorn sent a chill deeper than the rain, stirring the ghosts of bites and bruises. Ilara's scars itched beneath her clothes, reminders of the Alpha's wrath, the way he'd seized her by the throat after her vision, his breath hot with rage. "Unfit!" he'd snarled, casting her into the wilds like refuse. She'd wandered for weeks, evading his patrols, her Omega instincts warring between submission and the wild call that now thrummed in her veins, amplified by Draven's nearness. Was it his power, or something awakening in her? A low whine echoed in her chest, unbidden, and she clamped her lips shut, mortified. Draven tilted his head, scenting the air, his nostrils flaring subtly. "You feel it too, the pull, the moon's whisper in your blood." He stepped closer, the ground seeming to yield beneath his boots, and extended a hand scarred from claw and fang. Not a command, but an invitation. "Come, my camp is near the Vale Falls. You'll not face the night alone, not after what you've given." Ilara hesitated, her gaze flicking to his warriors. They watched with stoic intensity, but no malice gleamed in their eyes, only the quiet loyalty of those who'd followed a king through hells unspoken. The forest around them stirred, leaves rustling as if the trees themselves urged her forward. Hunger clawed at her gut, sharper now without the bread, but it was the loneliness that truly pierced, the endless drift since her banishment. To follow him meant stepping into the unknown, trading one pack's cruelty for another's enigma. Yet in his eyes she saw the wolf's trust mirrored, a fragile bridge across the abyss. With a nod more defiant than she felt, Ilara placed her hand in his. His grip was warm, calloused, enveloping her fingers like the earth's first thaw. A jolt raced up her arm, not pain, but a surge of vitality that chased the chill from her limbs. As they moved through the woods, his pack falling into step like shadows, the mist parted to reveal glimpses of the shadowed realms, twisted spires of ancient stone, half swallowed by vines, rivers that glowed faintly with lunar essence, and the distant roar of falls that sang of forgotten pacts. They reached the camp, as dawn's grey fingers clawed at the horizon, a cluster of tents woven from enchanted hides that shimmered like starlit fur, fires crackling with blue flames that defied the damp. Draven led her to the central pavilion, where furs lined the ground and the air smelled of herbs and smoked meat. His warriors dispersed without a word, respecting the sanctity of their king's debt. "Sit," he murmured, gesturing to a pile of pelts. A young shifter, a beta with wide eyes and tentative hands, brought a steaming bowl of stew, rich with venison and roots, alongside a strip of dried fish. Ilara's mouth watered, but she paused, memories of scraps and scorn flooding back. Draven noticed, kneeling before her with a predator's grace. "Eat, you've earned this and more." As she spooned the warmth into her mouth, the flavors bursting like forgotten sunlight, Draven settled across from her, his form shifting subtly in the firelight. He spoke then, voice weaving through the quiet like smoke. The curse binds me, eclipse nights turn me fully to the beast, stripping control until the moon wanes. Thorn's pack seeks to exploit it, to claim the crown I wear as their own. But you, your act broke through the haze, mercy where none was offered. Elara swallowed, the stew settling like ballast against her turmoil. I'm no savior, just a rejected Omega, accursed with visions that no one wants. She met his gaze, the amber depths pulling secrets from her. I saw fire in the Packlands, rebirth from ashes. Thorn called it treason. Draven's expression hardened, a flicker of rage crossing his features before softening into something akin to sorrow. Visions are the moon's gift, not curse. Yours may yet light the way. He reached out, brushing a damp strand from her face, his touch lingering, a spark that ignited the air between them. Impossible, her mind whispered. Alphas and Omegas from rival worlds didn't forge such bonds. Yet the pull grew, a destiny laced with sacrifice, as the first light pierced the tent flaps. Outside, a scout's howl cut the dawn. Thorn's forces closing in. Draven rose, his body tensing like a bow drawn taut. They come for you, little one, for the prophecy you bear. Ilara's heart pounded, the stew turning leaden in her belly. In that moment, as shadows lengthened anew, she realized her mercy had not saved only him. It had awakened the storm within her own fractured soul. The Alpha King's world was no sanctuary. It was a crucible, and she, the spark ready to ignite. The blue flames danced in the pavilion's heart, casting flickering shadows that clawed at the tent walls like eager specters. Ilara's spoon hovered midway to her lips, the stew's savory warmth forgotten as the scout's howl lingered in the air, a jagged warning that sliced through the fragile peace. Draven's hand tightened on the hilt of his dagger, the metal glinting like a sliver of moonlight, his body a coiled spring of restrained fury. The camp stirred outside, low growls rippling through the warriors as they melted into the tree line, their forms blurring with the dawn's mist. "Stay here," Draven commanded, his voice a low thunder that brooked no argument, though his eyes softened for her, a fleeting tenderness amid the storm. He rose, every movement precise, the scar on his chest pulling taut beneath his tunic. Ilara's pulse thrummed in her ears, a wild rhythm that echoed the fall's distant roar, now mingled with the snap of branches under approaching paws. Thorn's enforcers, brutes she'd once cowered before, were no phantoms. They were the pack's iron fist, scenting blood and betrayal on the wind. She should have obeyed, curled into the furs like the Omega she was raised to be, but the vision clawed at her mind's edges, flames devouring the Silverfang halls, a crown of thorns shattering under a reborn moon. It wasn't just a dream, it was a call, pulling her from the shadows. Setting the bowl aside, Ilara slipped from the pavilion, the damp earth cool against her bare feet. The air hummed with tension, thick as the Veilfall's spray, carrying the metallic tang of impending violence. Draven stood at the camp's perimeter, his silhouette etched against the rising light, flanked by two betas whose eyes glowed with feral readiness. The woods parted like a wound, revealing the first of Thorn's hunters, 5 wolves in half shift, fur bristling, fangs bared in snarls that vibrated the ground. At their lead loped a massive grey, his pelt scarred from dominance fights, eyes like chips of flint. Crag, Thorn's beta enforcer, the one who'd held her down during her banishment, his claws raking her side as Thorn spat his decree. "Draven!" Crag growled, shifting to man form mid-stride, his voice gravelly with contempt. He was broad as an oak, muscles corded from years of unchallenged brutality, a silver collar marking his allegiance glinting at his throat. The king of scraps trespasses on Silverfang lands. Hand over the girl, and we'll leave your mongrels to rot." Draven didn't flinch, his stance unyielding as the ancient stones half-buried nearby. "The wilds bow to no collars, Crag. Elara is under my protection. Take your master's leash and slink back before the moon tastes your blood." Laughter barked from the enforcers, harsh and mocking, but Elara saw the flicker in Crag's eyes, fear masked as bravado. Thorn's pack had grown bold, raiding the shadowed realms for the lunar relics, said to amplify an alpha's power, relics Draven guarded as sacred. Her presence here, the rejected seer, was the spark they'd hunt to extinguish. She stepped forward, heart pounding, the mud sucking at her feet. "Crag!" she called, her voice steadier than she felt, laced with the quiet fire of survival. "Thorn fears what he can't control. My visions aren't his to silence." The Beta's head snapped toward her, surprise twisting his snarl into something uglier. "Filth!" he spat, advancing with claws extending. "You dare speak? The Alpha will peel that tongue from your mouth and feed it to the crows." His pack circled, low and predatory, the air thickening with their musk. Dominance, rage, the stale rot of a pack rotten at its core. Draven moved like liquid shadow, positioning himself between them, a wall of muscle and menace. "Touch her, and your hunt ends in pieces." The words ignited the fray. Crag lunged, shifting fully to wolf form, jaws snapping for Draven's throat. The Alpha King met him mid-air, his own change rippling through him, not the full beast of the curse, but a hybrid fury, claws raking fur as they tumbled into the underbrush. Growls and snaps filled the dawn, blue flames from the camp leaping higher as if feeding on the chaos. Elara backed against a vine-choked tree, her breath ragged, but the pull in her blood surged, a hot tide that blurred her vision. The world tilted, colors sharpening. The enforcers' forms glowed with weak auras, threads of loyalty fraying like old rope, while Draven's blazed amber, unyielding. It was her gift awakening, the Omega sight Thorn had branded heresy, revealing truths hidden in the weave of fates. One enforcer broke from the pack, veering toward her, eyes locked on her throat. Panic clawed her chest, but instinct flared. She whispered a fragment of the vision. "Fire claims the chained." And the air shimmered, a burst of illusory heat singeing the wolf's muzzle. It yelped, recoiling as if burned, confusion scattering its charge. From the tangle of combat, Draven rose victorious, Crag's form limp at his feet, blood staining the leaves like spilled wine. The remaining enforcers faltered, their Beta's defeat a crack in their resolve. With howls of retreat, they melted into the woods, tails low, leaving echoes of defeat in their wake. Draven shifted back, chest heaving, a fresh gash across his shoulder weeping crimson. He turned to Elara, amber eyes searching, concern etching lines around them. "You wielded it," he murmured, approaching with careful steps, as if she were a flame he feared to extinguish. "The sight. I felt its echo." She trembled, the surge ebbing, leaving her drained, knees buckling against the tree. "I don't know how. It just came." The admission hung between them, vulnerable as exposed bone. In the pack, such power would have chained her tighter. Here it felt like wings unfurling, fragile but real. Draven knelt, his hand cupping her cheek, thumb tracing the line of a fading scar from her past. The touch ignited sparks, a bond deepening beyond words. Alpha and Omega, king and outcast, drawn by mercy's thread into something perilous, alive. But the victory was fleeting. From the east, deeper howls rose, Thorn's full force mobilizing, the ground trembling with their approach. Draven's expression darkened, the weight of realms pressing on his shoulders. "We can't stay. The falls hide a path to my stronghold, but they'll track us." He helped her stand, his warmth an anchor against the chill of what lay ahead. As they gathered the pack, Warriors tending wounds, scouts vanishing ahead. Ilara glanced back at the camp, its blue fires dimming like dying stars. Her act of kindness had summoned this king, this storm, but now it demanded more. Sacrifice, perhaps her very humanity, to face the prophecy's blaze. The Vale Falls thundered closer, a curtain of water veiling secrets older than the packs themselves. Ilara walked beside Draven, their hands brushing in the mist, the first threads of trust weaving through the fear. Yet in her heart, a shadow lingered, the impossible ache of longing for a world where Omegas like her weren't forged in fire, but born from it. As the sun crested, painting the canopy gold, the hunt closed in, destiny's jaws snapping at their heels. The mist from the Vale Falls rose like the breath of slumbering giants, cloaking the narrow path in a veil of silver that muffled the thunder of pursuit. Ilara's feet ached against the jagged stones, each step a jolt through her weary bones. But Draven's hand in hers was an unyielding tether, pulling her forward through the labyrinth of roots and ferns. The air hummed with the fall's roar, a symphony of water crashing against hidden caverns, carrying the faint, ethereal scent of moonblooms, flowers that only unfurled under lunar light, their petals whispering secrets to those who listened. Behind them, the howls of Thorn's pack echoed like fractures in the dawn, growing bolder, closer, a tide of fury that sought to drown them both. Draven moved with predatory ease, his wound from the skirmish already knitting under the influence of his royal blood, but Ilara felt the strain in his grip, the subtle tremor of a king who carried the weight of shadowed realms on his shoulders. His warriors fanned out ahead and behind, shadows among shadows, their forms blurring into the undergrowth as scouts relayed positions in low, urgent growls. "The path splits at the Whispering Caves," one murmured to Draven, his voice a rasp against the spray. "Thorn's beaters are flanking from the ridge, 20 strong at least. They smell the girl's power." Ilara's cheeks burned at the words, a mix of shame and defiance coiling in her gut. Power, it had been a fluke, that burst of illusory fire in the camp, born from desperation rather than control. In the Silverfang pack, such gifts were beaten out of Omegas, like weeds from a garden. Hers had marked her as a threat, a vessel for visions that unraveled Thorn's grip on his throne. Now, fleeing with the Alpha King, it felt less like a curse and more like a blade she didn't know how to wield, sharp but liable to cut her own hand. They pressed on, the path narrowing until the falls loomed like a living wall, water sheeting down in relentless curtains that blurred the world beyond. Draven paused at the edge, his amber eyes scanning the foam-churned pool below, where eddies swirled with an unnatural glow, remnants of the old magics that bound his curse. "The caves lie behind the falls," he said, turning to her. Rain-slicked hair framing his face like a crown of obsidian, a hidden vein through the rock leading to my stronghold. But the crossing, it's treacherous. The currents pull like the moon's tide, testing the unworthy. She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat, the bond between them thrumming like a second heartbeat. It had sparked in the pavilion. That touch, alpha essence mingling with her omega essence, forbidden and fierce, stirring longing she'd buried under layers of scorn. Love, impossible, her mind echoed. Yet here it was, blooming in the chaos. A quiet ache for his strength, his sorrow, the way his gaze stripped her bare without judgment. "I'm not afraid," she lied, meeting his eyes, the fall's mist beading on her lashes like unshed tears. In truth, fear gnawed at her, fear of the depths, of Thorn's claws closing in, of the prophecy that painted her as both savior and sacrifice. Draven's hand cupped her face, thumb tracing the curve of her jaw, a gesture tender amid the storm. "You should be, but fear can forge you stronger." He leaned in, his breath warm against her skin. And for a heartbeat the world narrowed to the space between them. the pull of destinies entwining, a promise unspoken. Then a warrior's sharp bark shattered the moment. "They're here! From the east!" The pack erupted into motion. Draven released her, shifting partially, his claws extending as he guided her toward the falls. Into the water, now! The pool swallowed her legs first, icy and unforgiving, the current yanking like greedy fingers. She gasped, the cold seizing her lungs, but Draven was there, his arm around her waist, propelling them through the torrent. Behind, snarls rent the air. Thorn's enforcers burst from the tree line, wolves in full fury, led by a scarred alpha lieutenant whose pelt gleamed with silver threads. Thorn's favored hunter, Riven, eyes locked on Ilara with murderous intent. One of Draven's betas met the charge head-on, a clash of fangs and fur that sprayed blood across the rocks. Ilara stumbled, the water dragging her under, visions flashing unbidden. Riven's throat torn, but at what cost? Draven's form, beast and man, warring within, the curse claiming him before the eclipse's peak. She surfaced, sputtering, Draven hauling her toward the falls, hidden cleft, a narrow fissure veiled by cascading water. "Hold to me," he growled, his voice strained as arrows whistled past, tipped with silver to pierce shifter hides. They plunged through the sheet, the world inverting into a roar of white noise and darkness. The cave mouth yawned like a maw, swallowing them into echoing chambers where bioluminescent fungi clung to the walls, casting a ghostly blue glow. Ilara clung to Draven, her nails digging into his shoulders, the bond pulsing hotter now, a lifeline against the terror. The current eased inside, the water shallows pooling around stalagmites etched with ancient runes, wards against intruders, glowing faintly as they passed. But peace was fleeting. Echoes pursued them, splashes, growls, the wet slap of bodies forcing the crossing. Draven shoved her deeper into the tunnel, his warriors forming a rear guard, their roars mingling with the falls. "Go! We'll hold them!" one shouted, the sound cut short by a yelp of pain. Ilara's heart twisted, tears mixing with the spray on her face, strangers fighting for her, dying, perhaps, because of a rejected Omega's mercy. The tunnel twisted upward, slick stone giving way to drier passages where the air grew thick with the scent of earth and forgotten rituals. Draven's breath came ragged, a gash reopening on his arm from the fray, blood trickling warm against her side. They emerged into a vast cavern, the heart of his stronghold. Crystalline walls veined with lunar quartz that pulsed like a living heart, illuminating chambers carved by time and magic. Tents and forges dotted the space, his people, shifters of every rank, from scarred elders to wide-eyed pups, turning as they entered, murmurs rippling like waves. Ilara collapsed against a fur-strewn ledge, exhaustion crashing over her like the falls outside. Draven knelt beside her, binding his wound with strips from his tunic, his face etched with the lines of command and something deeper, regret perhaps, for dragging her into his war. "You're safe here," he said softly, though the distant clamor of battle belied the words, "for now." She searched his eyes, the amber depths reflecting her own turmoil. "At what price? Your pack, my visions. It's all unraveling because of me." The confession spilled out, raw and aching, the solitude of her exile cracking under the weight of this new belonging. In the Silver Fangs, she'd been invisible. Here, she was the eye of the storm, her power stirring like embers in dry tinder. Draven's hand found hers again, calluses rough against her palm, not because of you, because of what you represent. Hope in the ruins. Thorn fears the rebirth, you see, the fall of tyrants like him. His voice dropped, laced with a vulnerability that pierced her. And I see it too, in you, a light against my curse's shadow. The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken sacrifice. The impossible love taking root in blooded soil, demanding they lose pieces of themselves to survive. Outside, The howls faded, victory or stalemate unclear, but the cavern's glow wrapped them in fragile respite. Ilara leaned into him, the bond humming with destiny's quiet promise, pain with purpose, a renaissance forged in the dark. Yet, as the quartz pulsed brighter, her vision flickered anew, flames licking the cavern walls, Draven's form twisting under the eclipse and her hand outstretched, choosing between saving him or shattering the chains that bound them all. The storm within her roared, no longer dormant, as the path to transformation narrowed to a razor's edge. The cavern's quartz veins throbbed like the arteries of some ancient beast, casting a pulsating blue light that danced across the faces of Draven's people. Ilara sat on the fur-draped ledge, her body heavy with the chill of the falls, still clinging to her skin, watching as warriors dragged in the wounded from the rear guard. Low moans echoed off the crystalline walls, mingling with the drip of water from unseen fissures, a somber dirge that underscored the fragile sanctuary they'd claimed. The air was thick with the scents of blood, herbs, and the faint, metallic tang of lunar essence, magic woven into the stone by ancestors who'd fled similar hunts, binding their fates to the earth's hidden heart. Draven knelt nearby, his broad shoulders hunched as he helped a beta bind a gashed leg, his hands steady despite the fresh crimson staining his own arm. The bond between them hummed, a subtle vibration that tugged at Ilara's core, like threads of moonlight pulling her toward him. It was more than alpha-omega instinct now. It was a tether forged in her mercy, his gratitude, growing thorns of longing amid the barbs of danger. She wanted to reach for him, to trace the scars that mapped his battles, but the weight of eyes upon her, curious, wary, held her back. In this underground realm, she was no longer invisible. She was the outsider, the spark that had drawn Thorn's fury like moths to flame. A elder shifter approached, her fur-streaked hair braided with quartz shards that chimed softly. Mira, Draven had called her earlier, the pack's seer, her eyes milky with visions long past. She settled beside Ilara, offering a clay cup of steaming broth infused with moonblooms, its glow faint but warming. "Drink." "Child," Mira rasped, her voice like wind through hollow bones. "The falls test the spirit as much as the flesh. You've stirred the old magics. Feel it in your veins." Ilara took the cup, the heat seeping into her palms, chasing the numbness. The broth tasted of earth and forgotten summers, easing the knot in her stomach, but it couldn't quiet the storm within. "I feel everything," she admitted, her voice a whisper lost in the cavern's hum. The vision from the falls lingered, flames not just destroying but purifying, Draven's form twisting in agony under an eclipsed sky. Her choice, a blade poised at his throat, or thorns. Guilt clawed at her, sharp as the scars on her side from Crag's claws. "I brought this here. Your people bleed because I fed a wolf in the rain." Mira's hand, gnarled and warm, covered hers. "Mercy isn't a chain, Omega. It's the moon's first light breaking the dark. Draven's curse. It devours isolation. You've given him a glimpse of another path." Her gaze drifted to the king, who now stood directing the healers, his silhouette framed by the quartz's glow like a shadowed god. "But paths diverge in eclipse. Yours will demand a piece of you, something cherished, to shatter the old bonds." The words settled like stones in Ilara's chest, stirring the pull of her own suppressed gift. Omega blood was meant for submission, for nurturing the pack's edges, not wielding fire from whispers. Yet here in this womb of stone, it uncoiled, visions flickering at the edges of her sight. Threads of fate weaving tighter, Draven's amber eyes dimming to grey, a howl of loss echoing through the realms. She rose, drawn to him despite the ache, the cavern's light playing across his face. Lines of exhaustion etched deeper, the curse's shadow lurking in the hollows of his cheeks. Draven turned as she approached, his expression softening, a rare vulnerability cracking his regal mask. "Rest, Ilara." The wards will hold till nightfall. But she shook her head, stepping closer, the bond flaring like embers stirred by breath. The cavern seemed to hush, warriors pausing in their tasks, sensing the shift in the air, a charged stillness, heavy with unspoken destinies. "I can't," she said, her hand finding his arm, fingers brushing the warmth of his skin through the torn fabric. "The visions, they're clearer now. Thorn's not just hunting me. He wants the lunar relics here, the ones that bind your curse. If he claims them, he'll twist the moon's power, force every pack to kneel." Her voice trembled, but she held his gaze, the amber depths pulling her in, mirroring her own hidden fire. Impossible love bloomed in that stare, tender and fierce, a defiance against the pack's cruel hierarchies. Alphas took, Omegas gave, but this, his quiet yielding her rising strength, it was rebellion wrapped in longing. Draven's free hand rose, cupping her neck, thumb grazing the pulse that raced beneath her skin. "Then we face it together. The eclipse nears, 2 nights hence. My control frays with each hour." His breath mingled with hers, warm against the cavern's cool draught, and for a moment the world narrowed. No howls, no blood, just the rhythm of hearts sinking like the fall's eternal roar. He leaned in, lips brushing her forehead, in a gesture of fierce protection, igniting sparks that chased the melancholy from her bones. Yet beneath it, sorrow lingered, the knowledge that such tenderness demanded sacrifice, a loss to fuel the rebirth she foresaw. A sudden tremor shook the cavern, dust sifting from the ceiling like grey snow, the quartz veins flickering erratically. Shouts erupted from the outer tunnels, scouts returning, faces smeared with mud and alarm. "Breach!" one barked, shifting mid-stride to reveal gashes from claws. "Thorn's sappers! They've tunneled under the eastern ward. Riven leads them, with silver-laced nets to snare the king." Draven's body tensed, the king resurfacing in a surge of command, but his hand lingered on Elara a heartbeat longer, a silent vow. "To arms!" he roared, the pack mobilizing like a living beast, weapons clanging, forms blurring into hybrid fury. Elara felt the bond strain, a hot wire pulling her into the fray, not as bystander but participant. Her power stirred, unbidden, a warmth pooling in her chest, ready to weave illusions into reality. As they rushed toward the breach, the cavern walls groaning under assault, Elara glimpsed Mira's knowing nod from the shadows. The Elder's warning echoed, "Lose something cherished." In the chaos, as stone cracked and snarls filled the air, Elara realized it might be her fragile hope, the illusion of safety in Draven's arms, that the storm would claim first. Violence erupted in the tunnels ahead, tender moments shattered by the grind of destiny, but in her heart, a quiet resolve hardened. Pain with purpose, love forged in the eclipse's maw. The path narrowed, transformation's fire licking at their heels. As the shadowed realms trembled on the brink, the cavern walls shuddered like the ribs of a dying beast, cracks spiderwebbing through the quartz veins as the assault's fury clawed deeper. Dust choked the air, mingling with the acrid bite of silver. Thorn's poisoned edge laced into nets and blades to sear shifter flesh and bind the wild spirit. Elara's lungs burned with each breath. The bond with Draven a frantic pulse in her veins, urging her forward through the dimming glow. Warriors surged past, their howls a cacophony of defiance, pelts rippling as they shifted into hybrid forms, claws scraping stone in a desperate bid to hold the line. Draven led the charge, his silhouette a blaze of motion amid the chaos, amber eyes fierce with the king's unyielding fire. But Elara saw the strain, the curse's shadow creeping at his edges, the eclipse's approach fraying his control like threads pulled too tight. He glanced back once, a raw plea in his gaze. Stay behind. Yet she couldn't. The visions hammered her skull, fragments of flame and shattered crowns, her power uncoiling like a serpent in her blood. No longer the rejected Omega cowering in shadows. She was the storm's eye, Mercy's spark now ablaze, demanding release. The tunnel narrowed into a choking maw, lit by sporadic bursts of quartz light that painted the fray in stark blues and silvers. Thorn's sappers burst from a fresh breach, their forms hulking and armoured, silver chains whipping through the air like vipers. Riven led them, his silver-threaded pelt scarred from the fall's crossing, eyes locked on Draven with a hatred born of stolen borders. "The king falls tonight," he snarled, voice echoing off the stone as he hurled a net woven with lunar barbs, relics twisted by Thorn's greed, meant to drag Draven into the beast's full rage. Draven dodged, the net snagging a warrior behind him instead. The beta howled, silver searing his hide, collapsing in a writhing heap as the curse's echo twisted his limbs unnaturally. Ilara's stomach lurched, the scent of burned fur thick in her nostrils. She pressed against the wall, heart thundering, but the bond flared hot, a warning, a call. Riven lunged for Draven, jaws snapping, but the Alpha King countered with brutal precision, claws raking the lieutenant's flank, drawing blood that sizzled on the stone. In the melee, Ilara's vision sharpened, the world fracturing into threads of fate. Riven's aura frayed, loyalty poisoned by ambition. Draven's steady but dimming, the eclipse's pull like ink, bleeding into light. Her power surged unbidden, a warmth blooming in her chest, spilling outward in a whisper of will. "Break," she breathed, the word weaving into the air like smoke. The net around the fallen beta shimmered, silver links dissolving into illusory ash, freeing him to rise with a grateful snarl. The sappers faltered, confusion rippling through their ranks as phantom flames licked at their paws, born from her mind's desperate forge. Draven seized the moment, barreling into Riven with a roar that shook loose pebbles from the ceiling. They clashed in a whirlwind of fur and fang, bodies slamming against the walls, quartz shards exploding like brittle stars. Ilara edged closer, dodging a stray swipe from a sapper, her bare feet slick with blood and water. The bond thrummed louder, sinking their breaths, his pain echoing in her ribs, a gash across his side from Riven's claws, the curse accelerating the bleed. Impossible love, she thought, the ache twisting sweet and sharp. In this hell of stone and shadow, his nearness was the only light, a tenderness forged in violence. Riven pinned Draven against a stalagmite, silver collar glinting as he pressed for the kill. "Thorn's reign ends your curse. Your throne becomes his altar." But Ilara's voice cut through, amplified by the cavern's echo. "No chains hold the moon." Her power lashed out, stronger now, wrapping Riven in visions of his own fall, flames devouring his pelt, Thorn's betrayal laid bare. He recoiled, eyes wide with terror, giving Draven the opening to drive his claws home. Riven crumpled, a gurgling whine escaping as life ebbed, his body shifting back to man-form in death's final mockery. The sappers broke, retreating into the breach with panicked yelps. But victory's taste was ash. Draven staggered, the curse's toll crashing over him, his form rippling, half-beast straining against the man, eyes flickering from amber to wild gold. Ilara caught him as he slumped, her arms wrapping around his waist, the warmth of her touch a fragile anchor. "Hold on," she whispered, pressing her forehead to his chest, feeling the erratic thunder of his heart. Blood soaked her hands, warm and sticky, mingling with tears she hadn't realized were falling. The cavern's quartz dimmed, as if mourning, the distant roar of the falls a dirge for the fallen. Warriors hauled the wounded back to the heart chamber, the air heavy with groans and the copper tang of sacrifice. Mira waited in the glow, her milky eyes seeing more than the flesh. She guided Draven to a rune-etched slab, herbs and moonbloom poultices at the ready, while Ilara knelt beside him, unwilling to release his hand. "The eclipse calls stronger," Mira murmured, grinding leaves into a paste that glowed faintly. "One night remains. The relics must be sealed or used, but the cost, it claims the heart's tether." Draven's grip tightened on Ilara's, his voice a ragged growl. "Not you. Never you." Pain laced the words, his body trembling as the curse clawed inward, visions of his full transformation haunting his gaze. The beast, unbound, devouring ally and foe alike. Ilara leaned in, lips brushing his knuckles, the bond a lifeline humming with desperate hope. Solitude had been her exile's companion. Now, this love, impossible, profound, demanded she face the loss Mira foretold. Her visions whispered it. To save him, she'd sever a piece of herself, the Omega's yielding spirit, birthing something fiercer. As healers worked, the cavern settled into uneasy quiet, scouts sealing the breach with warded stone. Ilara traced the scars on Draven's chest, the one she'd bandaged in the rain, now joined by fresh wounds, a map of their shared path. Outside, the shadowed realms stirred. Thorn's howls rallying for the final push, the eclipse's shadow lengthening like fate's inexorable hand. In the blue-tinged hush, Ilara felt the transformation stir within, pain with purpose, death's edge birthing hope. The night deepened, destiny's jaws parting wider, as the rejected Omega became the flame to light the king's shadowed throne. The quartz slab beneath Draven gleamed like a frozen tear in the cavern's faltering light, its runes pulsing erratically as the eclipse's approach poisoned the air. Ilara's fingers trembled against his skin, slick with sweat and blood, tracing the jagged lines where the curse gnawed deeper, turning veins to shadowed rivers. The healers had retreated, their poultices spent, leaving only Mira's grave stare and the distant clamour of reinforcements sealing the outer wards. Night had fallen like a shroud over the shadowed realms, the moon's silver edge already fraying into the sun's defiant glow, a celestial wound that mirrored the one in Draven's chest. He lay still now, breath shallow and ragged, the beast within clawing for release. Amber eyes, dulled to embers, fixed on Ilara with a desperation that stripped him bare. "Go!" he rasped, voice fracturing like stone under pressure. "Thorn comes at the heart of it. The relics, seal them without me." But his hand clutched hers, betraying the lie, the bond a live wire, humming with the terror of severance. Ilara shook her head, tears carving hot paths down her cheeks, mingling with the cavern's damp chill. In the Silverfangs, she'd learned to yield, to fade. Here, yielding meant losing him, the impossible light that had pierced her exile's endless grey. Mira's voice cut through the hush, low and inexorable. "The eclipse demands balance, child. The curse feeds on isolation, yours, his. To break it, offer what the moon craves, a tether severed, reborn." Her milky eyes gleamed with ancient sorrow, hands weaving a final ward of moonbloom petals around the slab. Ilara's vision surged then, unbidden and vivid, the cavern aflame. Thorn's silhouette crowned in stolen quartz, Draven's form twisting into the feral wolf she'd first met, jaws snapping at shadows that wore her face. The loss crystallized, her Omega essence, the quiet submission that had kept her alive through scorn, now the key to his freedom. Sacrifice it, and she'd rise unchained, but the tenderness between them might fracture, leaving scars deeper than claws. The ground quaked, a roar echoing from the sealed tunnels. Thorn's final assault, silver-laced battering rams shattering wards like brittle bones. Warriors howled in response, the cavern erupting into motion. Pups herded to inner chambers, forges igniting with blue flames that licked the air hungrily. Draven tried to rise, muscles bunching in futile defiance, but the curse pinned him, a low whine escaping his throat, half man, half beast, the line blurring under the eclipse's pull. Ilara leaned over him, forehead to forehead, their breaths sinking in the charged space. "I won't leave you to the dark," she whispered, lips brushing his, a kiss born of defiance and longing. It tasted of salt and storm, violence yielding to tenderness, the bond flaring bright before the inevitable dim. She pulled away, resolve hardening like quartz in her core, and turned to the relic chamber, a vaulted alcove where lunar stones hummed in crystalline arrays, their power the source of Draven's curse and Thorn's greed. Mira followed, murmuring incantations that wove the air into shimmering threads. As they entered, the eclipse crested outside, the moon's light twisting through fissures in the rock, bathing the relics in blood-red hues. Ilara's power uncoiled fully now, no longer a whisper but a torrent, visions solidifying into tactile force, flames that didn't burn but purified, threads of fate she could grasp and snap. The vault door groaned open under Thorn's siege, the Alpha himself bursting through like a thunderhead. Massive, furred in silver and black, eyes blazing with tyrannical fire. His pack poured in behind, enforcers with silver nets and blades, their howls a chorus of conquest. "The Seer and the Cursed King!" Thorn snarled, voice booming off the crystals, his form rippling with barely contained shift. Scars from old battles twisted his muzzle, a crown of thorns forged from stolen relics glinting at his brow. "Your mercy ends in chains. The moon's power is mine. Pax will kneel, Omegas like her broken to serve." Ilara stepped forward, the air around her shimmering with her awakened sight, illusions blooming into reality. Phantom wolves circling Thorn's flanks, snapping at heels that weren't there. He faltered, snarling in rage but pressed on, claws extended for her throat. Draven's roar echoed from the slab, distant but fierce, the bond pulling her strength to him, even as it drained her. Warriors clashed in the antechamber, blue flames leaping to meet silver, the cavern a maelstrom of fur, fang, and shattering stone. Thorn lunged, his paw swiping air as Ilara dodged, her power lashing out, a burst of visionary fire that singed his pelt, revealing the rot in his aura, a throne built on fear, crumbling from within. "You rejected me for this," she cried, voice steady amid the chaos, the Omega's quiet breaking into a howl of her own. He laughed, cruel and hollow, circling her like prey. "You're nothing, vision or no. I'll carve that power from your bones." But the eclipse peaked, the red light flooding the vault, igniting the relics in a symphony of cracks and glows. Ilara felt the pull then, the moon demanding her offering. She reached inward, grasping the core of her submission. The yielding spirit that had fed the wolf bound her to the pack's shadows. With a cry that tore from her soul, she severed it, the bond with Draven snapping like a frayed rope, pain lancing through her like lightning. Blood welled from unseen wounds, her vision blurring as power flooded out, flames erupting true now, not illusion, devouring Thorn's silver crown, melting his weapons into slag. Thorn howled, recoiling as the fire licked his form, purifying the greed that twisted him. His pack broke, enforcers fleeing the blaze that spared Draven's warriors, turning on the invaders like the moon's judgment. Ilara collapsed to her knees, the loss a hollow ache in her chest. Solitude's echo returning, sharper for having known connection. But from the slab, Draven rose, the curse shattering like glass under the released magic, his form stabilizing, amber eyes clear and whole. He staggered to her, gathering her into his arms amid the dying flames, the cavern settling into hushed aftermath. Thorn's body smouldered at the vault's edge, his reign reduced to ash, the relics dimming to peaceful quartz. Warriors gathered, howls of triumph mingling with sobs for the fallen, the shadowed realms breathing free for the first time in ages. Draven's touch was gentle, calloused hands cradling her face, the bond reforming, not as chain, but as equal weave, Alpha and Omega reborn in mutual fire. "You gave everything," he murmured, voice rough with emotion, lips pressing to her temple. Ilara leaned into him, the pain ebbing into purpose, her scars, old and new, a map of transformation. The eclipse waned, dawn's light piercing the fissures like hesitant hope, painting the cavern in gold. In that quiet, as the pack knelt not in submission but reverence, Ilara felt the renaissance. Love no longer impossible, but earned through sacrifice, a wild heart howling into the light. The moon sighed above, approving the fragile dawn, as the rejected Omega became the queen of ruins rebuilt.